The Absent Dialogue by Anit Mukherjee talks about a growing gap. Some would say it should be diminishing, but a growing gap in the conversation that takes place within India's strategic and security affairs establishment around decisions to be taken, how power is to be distributed, and who, in fact, is in charge of the command theatre. Before I get our distinguished panel into the conversation, and one of the interesting points that you make in your book is challenging the commonly held assumption that the main tension and the main gap and the main space where this dialogue is absent is between bureaucrats and forges. You make the argument that it is in fact between politicians and the military that this dialogue is absent. Why do you say that? One thing that you say is it's because such few of India's politicians have actually any exposure to the military. Such few of India's politicians have ever served in the military. Why then is all the focus being on the Babus instead of the Netas?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. Firstly, I have to say that there have been certain instances where we have had some of the politicians who actually knew about the Armed Forces Act. So if you see Arun Singh, for instance, we had a great time in those. But I also think it's a little unrealistic to expect our politicians to actually get on with it with understanding intricate issues like defense. I mean, if you look at other countries, it's hard to expect them to because it takes a long time to understand. Firstly, secondly, because you don't have access to sources, it's very hard to grow the strategic study. So even if a politician is interested in these affairs, how much time and energy can be spent on this? And a big part of the problem then in other countries is that this politician is advised by a mixed staff. I emphasize again, a mixed staff of civilians and the military staff. So they have an integrated Ministry of Defense that actually advises them on capability building within the armed forces.
But give the audience a sense of the percentage discrepancy between, let's say, American politicians who served in the military and Indians. I know that's something that the book has researched.
Right. I mean, so I think it's a little unfair because America had the draft in the 1960s, right? But I think in broad terms, it's about 30% in the US have had some.
And about 3% here?
3%. So
that's a huge gap. I just want to underline that. About 30% of all American politicians have, maybe because of the compulsory draft in the 1960s, served in the military, only about 3% here. Rajiv Chandrasekhar is that rare politician who I think has committed himself to the cause of the military. Would you say that has been, in a sense, a personal passion? And how do you extend your personal passion to the rest of the establishment? And I ask you this in particular because, sometimes you've been that lone voice in your party, in your establishment, speaking up, for example, for the rights of disabled soldiers, speaking up for the government not dragging the war wounded to court, speaking up on the NFFU, speaking up on a host of other issues, the OROB. But you can't be that solo voice. I think that's what Anit is arguing, that a few good men won't change this game.
Yeah, so I don't think I got into this because I consciously chose in 2006 when I entered Parliament that I would focus on this. I mean, as you know, I'm a son of a veteran. I grew up all my life amongst men and families in uniform. So I think that is part of my DNA. More than a politician, I'm a service son. But having said that, I tend to disagree with Anit that it is unrealistic to expect politicians to know about defense. I think it is a reasonable expectation to have for anybody who is an Indian citizen that the minister or the political leader that is waxing eloquent about a subject knows a little bit about the subject, A. B. and is not therefore only prone to advice that is given to him by people who in many cases know even less than him on the subject.
And it opens up that issue, which is that you then create, and there's a phrase that is used here in this book, which I actually love, which is this concept of mutual incomprehension. So you have, I think that summarizes this absent dialogue more than anything else. I think the book should have been called Mutual Incomprehension. And that is a lot to do with it because, and again, I speak as a politician, I think there is really very little incentive for the political class to dive deep into the intricacies of national security.
And why would you say that? Because never before have issues of security and national security been as center stage in the national imagination as they are today.
So you just step back a minute, Barka, and ask yourself and ask people in the media. I think the narrative around the armed forces is in the media or in the general civil society is almost always framed around valor, sacrifice, tradition, the legend. There is very little discussion and debate in mainstream civil society about the future of our armed forces. You talk about weapons procurement, but there is really very little debate about what technologies are we supposed to be very good at to basically strengthen our national security. So I think it's a good discussion to have, but I don't think the answers to this are going to be as simple or intuitive. Or I think there is a gap, and I think mutual incomprehension is a extremely good way to explain where we are at today. The book really nicely talks about how we got here, but the fact is today we have this vacuum, and I think it's a good place to start a discussion.
So, Anit, with no disrespect to your book, General V.P. Malik, I know in his second book, first brought up the space of the absent dialogue. General Malik, I remember being at that book launch in Chandigarh, and you're talking about all of these policy spaces which relate to the military, where the military literally has no say. And the military is just informed, you have to do this, and then you execute it. Now, of course, the civilian control over the military in our democracy has always been absolute. But can you speak a little bit to your actual experiences? Share with us one or two instances where you were stupefied to find that a decision had been taken with regard to the military, which the military or the military leaders had not been consulted on.
I think that was the comment, so there's no problem. But before I answer your question, let me first compliment Anit. Compliment for his great perseverance. I mean, I have not seen anybody taking on one subject for so long that I have seen. I met him about 15, 16 years ago, and since then he has been working on the subject. And I also want to congratulate him because the manner in which he has gone about research as well as deep analysis of the subject. Not only deep research but also so he's come out with a very, I would say, quality book, which is very nice. Congratulations on that. Now, I think both terms are correct. The national dialogue, as well as what Rajiv has mentioned, incomprehension, mutual incomprehension. We don't get to see the defense minister often on the policy making. Final policy making is done and then we get told. Of course, the inputs are taken, but the inputs are generally juggled around between the military and the bureaucrats, and so you don't get to see that. But there is a difference here, I must mention, and the difference is what happens in peacetime and what happens in wartime. During wartime, I saw that we were very fortunate, we had very close interaction, and I cannot blame anybody because every day we used to meet everybody, not only the CCS but also the bureaucrats who were involved from Ministry of Defense as well as the others also. But then at that time when you have to work on a military strategy or explain to each other and then also explain what is more important is not the military strategy, what is more important from the military point of view as well as from the ministerial point of view is the implications of that policy, that other strategy that we are working on. So I must say that I had no problem during Kargil war because one big deal that we were all working together. We used to have meetings once, twice, sometimes.
How did you handle differing opinions on the next moves? And I ask you this because you have spoken in the past about the differences on what visibly crossing the line of control, for example, and using air power across the line of control rather than
No, initially there was a problem for the Air Force because Air Force, you can't blame them. They looked at it, and this is what the point that they put up to the cabinet was that look, if we start using the Air Force now, it will escalate. And apparently the cabinet was not interested in escalating. It's quite clear. But after I came back from abroad, as you know, I was abroad, and then I went to the ground, and then I spoke to the two chiefs, including the air chief, and I explained to them that look, the situation is far more serious than we have made out so far. And every all three services have to work together. We have to work on a military strategy. And both the chiefs agreed. Thereafter, we had no problem at all. So it was a discussion that resulted in our joint working and working out on the joint military strategy, which the cabinet promptly agreed when I explained to them that look, this is what we have done. But what I was coming to was that during peacetime we have a lot of problems. It is during peacetime, which is important, as pointed out, that is the time when you are working on defense plans, working on so many other policies. There is a lot of suspicion. There is a lot of delay in files being moved around and compartmentalization. The military doesn't know what the bureaucrat has recommended to the minister doesn't call you. No, that is where, and unless that is improved, this problem will continue.
So I'm hearing you say that this absent dialogue is greater in peacetime than in times of war and conflict.
That's right.
Before I get Sanjay Mitra and Manvendra Singh in, I just want to bring you in because I do remember that in one of our previous conversations, you referenced the Balakot strike and you said that to you, that was an illustration of perhaps there being some sort of absent dialogue, or if it wasn't absent, then it wasn't fully known what the cohesion in that conversation was. Can you speak to that?
Thank you so much for that opportunity. Yes, firstly, I think it was a great decision to undertake a response to the Pulwama attack. And I think it was fantastic that the Prime Minister gave the green light to that. About the Balakot incident and the day after, as an Indian, I'm a little unhappy. I think we should have done better on both ways because I go outside the country and I say partial hit to an audience is laughing. I think we should have had, and so I think we should have had tougher questions asked about did the Indian Air Force get some sort of a directive in the last 3-4 years preceding that this is the sort of task that we would expect you to actually undertake. And if that's true, then did the Indian Air Force actually invest in acquiring the capabilities? And this means well-informed questions of did the pilots who undertake that mission actually carry out live firing or ammunition between Pulwama and Balakot? Very specific. Secondly, and I think these are questions that need to be asked to enhance the performance of the services themselves. Right? This is not calling into question the patriotism, professionalism, or the bravery of any of the soldiers or the airmen involved. It's just asking very specific questions. Why couldn't we deploy suit like these at Avantipur? Why only military plans? What was the training ammunition that was given to the Air Force to carry out these trainings? And the Air Force is now hinting at these stories are emerging now about lack of BVR capabilities, lack of AVAC coverage. These are questions that need to be asked. These are questions that needed to be asked by the civilians. Now, under this political climate, I don't think that these questions will be asked because it is highly inconvenient. But I think as a professional organization, these are questions.
So who should have asked those questions?
I think the civilians should have asked these questions.
When you say civilians, define civilians.
I think it should have been the RM, the Prime Minister, in consultation with the civilian bureaucrat who knows about this in the Defense Ministry, to actually ask these questions. I don't know if these questions were asked. I would think as a member of the Indian public, I think so. As an Indian, I felt a little unhappy. As an author, I felt vindicated because this is what I'm talking about. The lack of effectiveness goes down into these issues.
You want to come in, I was going to bring in Sanjay. Sanjay, not specifically on Balakot, but in your experience of having been a defense secretary and then having been, in some ways, that much reviled figure for the Fauji's, and I don't mean you personally. I mean the idea of the defense secretary. You could ask any Fauji I've known. It's like those babus sitting in MOD. How did you take it upon yourself to bridge that gap? And did you feel sometimes that there were systemic problems, and it was really not about the MOD, it was not about which individual sat in the chair. But that sense of that gap when it came to, let's say, pay commission conversations, when it came to procurement conversations, when it came to the lack of military representation on many of these big panels. How do you as a senior bureaucrat tackle some of these questions?
I was fortunate that I worked with 3 chiefs, 4, on gentlemen retired, who were more than willing to come out. I was fortunate to work with a group of chiefs of staff who were more than willing to come more than 50% of the way to elicit my opinions, to give them due consideration, and to some cases take action on what I've said. It may not have been the most informed opinion, but it was also not completely off the cuff and mad.
I mean, I'm tempted to ask you who is off the cuff and mad, but I don't know how to answer.
I'm very clear. I refer to myself. So it's very personality dependent. Huge. In our history,
Should it be?
it should be.
It shouldn't be that personality.
There is no other way. There is no way. The difference between 71 and the other wars is there was a very strong political personality that helped the party. It didn't really matter whether you are joining us or not. You were told to do this. And I can actually tell from personal experience, although I would not like to go any further with it, that I would disagree completely with Anit that there was no belligerent, there was no discussion, there was substantial discussion. And I saw what jointness means at close, and I was a part of the discussion that I think you can quibble about what we should have done, what we shouldn't have done, who laughs, who doesn't laugh. These things can go on about.
So you don't see Balakote's aftermath, the conversation, I mean, as
Yes.
an illustration of an absence
So
of
General Malik is
cohesive
completely right.
narrative.
When we are in a crisis, we do well. When there is a flood, even in civil bureaucracy, we do very well in an election, we do very well in a flood, but we are not very great at running environment policy. But it's the civilian, this time conversation that is the most tension. Whether you have OROP, whether you have non-functional upgradation, whether you have this kind of weapon or that kind of weapon, one that leads to tension. When we are in trouble, we kind of gang up and it happens very well, very smooth. So, I think that's what my feeling is.
Rajiv, want to just add on Balakote's?
So I just want to take on, not take on it, but I want to respond on it. I think he's right when he says that there should be and there must be an ongoing discussion on debate on capability. Thus, given the national security scenarios that we have, is the Air Force capable? Are the platforms and training capable to do this kind of interdiction? And that kind of debate is necessary. And I think, but I disagree that with his assumption that that kind of discussion is not taking place. And I think that is being a bit facetious because Balakote didn't just happen because they prepared for it day before yesterday, before Pulwama. I mean, I think all of us who were not even fully plugged into the government knew that from 2014 that the government and the forces were preparing for and developing the capabilities to interdict, not necessarily in this kind of detailed knowledge, but we knew that was clearly
The
known to the
capacity
forces.
building to cross was being undertaken.
But I do accept from Anit that there ought to be more and more of a discussion about what are the challenges and what are the capabilities. And I say this, I'll just finish in 5 seconds now. That if you look at sometimes the presentations that are made to us as members of parliament about the armed forces perspective plan, and you try and overlay that with what the external affairs ministry says sometimes about the region and the threats, and then you overlay that with what the DRDO or the labs are doing in terms of developing technology, you actually come away with the impression that these are 3 different people talking 3 different languages and they're operating into 3 different worlds. So to that extent, having one common language about who the threat is, what the threats are, and what the capabilities must be, and what
It's actually a unifying moment.
Yes, and I think that kind of a discussion and debate is necessary, and it's not probably as developed as maybe in some of the Western countries, but I think it has started in the last 4 or 5 years. It needs to become richer, deeper, and much more, let's say,
Cohesive.
Yes.
Sachi, you wanted to add briefly? Yeah.
So I agree with Mr. Chandrasekhar that capabilities, which is related to acquisition, is a very important part of this discussion. And that's where I think we could have done more in this particular reform that we've done. And the acquisition continues to be the civilians. And it creates a kind of diarchy, and this should have been rightfully the CDS, because the CDS now has enormous powers of the armed forces in terms of promotions, postings, awards. So therefore, he would also be in a position to influence the preparation of qualitative requirements, which are basically another fancy term for specifications, and about the kind of equipment you want to buy. And so, this is it. Acquisition also drives indigenization. And if you are serious about indigenization and not having to buy everything from abroad, this should have been a part. So I thought I'll just add.
Yeah. So of course we're going to get into the debate around the CDS, and I'm seeing General Malik's hand go up also. But Anit, you wanted to come in briefly, and I have to go to Manvendra after that.
Quick point. One is, I wish journalists or some different journalists would ask tougher questions of if from 2014 why when the capabilities to build garden shelters in Avantika base. I think these stories are coming out now, right? About the Air Force being outdone with its PBR capabilities.
But isn't it natural that many of these stories will come after the moment? I think that
But
even as
if,
journalists,
if that dialogue, if
I
that
mean,
conversation
if
was
your country
happening,
is at battle, that would not be that precise moment to raise those questions.
so if that conversation or that dialogue started happening in 2014, we wouldn't have had the structural weaknesses that are now coming out.
Okay. Manvendra is someone who's been a journalist, who has served in the Territorial Army and is now a politician. To that extent, does your perception of the absent dialogue change from which side you're looking at it from?
No, it doesn't change. I think the broad experiences that I benefited from help in my understanding a lot. And part of what I would explain is already in the book, but there are some aspects which are not in the book and which are from my experience. And listen, all bureaucracies have two permanent traits, and I mean civilian and military bureaucracies. First is they expand. They have tendency to expand. And second trait which they also have common amongst all is they will never share. They won't devolve. And because bureaucracies don't devolve and they tend to expand, there is an encroachment that happens onto space. And India's case, I think Rajiv mentioned it pretty well. In India's case, the encroachment has actually happened on the political space, where the policy input, which I think, I'm a believer that policy has to emanate from elected authority or electable authority. Because that person, he or she, is more in tune with the people and more in tune with what is required for the country and around the country. That's where the policy should start from. Implementation, fine-tuning it is the job of the civilian
But
and
that kind of suggests that popular opinion of what the people feel should define something as niche as military policy. I mean, I'm not sure that I agree with that.
What I meant is in terms of what the people expect in terms of security. I'm not talking in terms of detail. Detail has to come from an intellect.
Okay.
And that intellect, which is the main thing I wanted to come to was, that intellect is absent in India because within the political class, there is no critical mass of military experience. But you don't have to have served in the military to have knowledge.
Be interested in it.
You have to have awareness, knowledge. Awareness of it. And that it's easy to blame the politician for it, but it is actually a social reflection. The politician reflects society, and India is unique, amongst democracies, India is unique because it has a diminishing number of political people with military experience or knowledge. It used to be much more earlier. When India became independent, I'm sure there must be high number of politicians who are literally aware.
I'm just saying no, and
Maybe not. Maybe it's already been a problem. Maybe it's already been a problem. But the fact is, the Indian society, the social elite of India, doesn't send people to serve.
And so,
I mean the feudal elite, the economic,
do you
financial
support a
elite.
draft?
No, I don't support a draft. But I do support a national service of a sort. Not a draft, but a national service. I think anybody who enters government service should have done some military service.
Is the Subedar Major who's an MP not a good military person, not fit to talk about military affairs? Subhas Kisi was a Subedar Major. Was he good enough to talk about many things in military? I'm sure he was. I think the elite business cannot be carried too far.
No, elite is not from birth. The elite is from experience.
Okay. What I want to do, General, just give me half a second because we'll come to the CDS last. Because what I think the conversation has gone in a different direction. One of the points, Anit, that you make in your book is that oddly, even given, despite Pakistan and China, your argument is that one of the reasons for this gap is that India and India's political class does not perceive there to be any existential threat to the country. And therefore, it doesn't actually invest in understanding the military, in understanding strategic affairs in the way that many other countries would. That's one point. The other point, you kind of breezily refer to moments in time where there was apprehension of a coup. And you don't go into great there. You deal with the sort of story around, in the Indian Express story at that time when General V.K. Singh was chief, and you talk about what happens when Lal Bahadur Shastri dies. So I want you to pick up both of these points and talk about what you discovered to be the political attitude to the military and what explains what Manvendra has just called this failure to understand or this lack of interest in understanding the military.
That's a great question. Firstly, the coup stories were there in the 60s, right? When India was really going through a political transition and change, and every journalist, Western journalists especially, were predicting imminent military coup because they could not fathom why would Indian democracy succeed. Right? And if you look at Ram Bhuva's work, he's done an excellent job of describing it, right? Of how Indian democracy succeeded despite it. And so all these, and these were contested coups, right? I mean, these were stories of I just did it to prevent large crowds and it was misinterpreted. So we still don't know the story behind this. And that's why I kind of spoke about that. And it comes out in the biographies and the memoirs of those people. It is not there with official. With the General V.K. Singh story, I think the coup is an overextension, but there is a definite lack of trust between the civilians and the military. I do know that the government did get spooked out with the movement of this para brigade and this so-called, and so they called back the defense secretary now. What I thought, I started off with that story not to talk about the coup, but generally to talk about the lack of trust. And I think this element of
who doesn't trust who? Is it the Fauji's who don't trust the Netas? Is it the Netas who don't trust the military?
I think the Netas born out of mutual incomprehension, and I'm going to reuse the word that Rajiv used for my book. The Netas born out of a mutual incomprehension look for advice to the civilian bureaucracies, and it's the IB, whether it's the RAW, whether it is the IAS, because they cannot distinguish good military advice from bad military advice, and they get both, right? If a general marches into the RM's office and says, I want this to be done, and then he does not understand the intricacies of the issue. Right? And then he says, let me look at the file, jiska kahani hai.
Okay, let me get General Malik. General Malik, do you not think that this talk, even loose talk of a coup, is laughable? Like, I do not know a single soldier of any consequence who would even engage. I mean, I was not around in the 60s, so I don't know about the 60s, but at least as much as I have seen contemporary military politics interface, this is inconceivable.
It is laughable. That is the better word. I know that particular exercise which was conducted that day. What is the origin? Because it originated during my time, but it is earlier, before me. And we have some exercises which are conducted once in a year, where the troops from different places, the kind of troops that we want, for a particular mission, I'm not going to go into it, they are required to concentrate at a particular place. Okay, it just so happened that particular exercise, when it was being conducted, V.K. Singh had gone to the court.
And was already at loggerheads with the
And he
cabinet.
was already. And that is why all this thing happened. But as I said, it is a laughable thing. I know what happened. I also, the movement of the troops, etc. So the reaction to that is laughable, and probably it shows incomprehension of this thing. Now, V.K. Singh could have explained this thing to the defense secretary or to the defense minister that look, we do these kind of exercises every year. I don't know what happened, but I know that kind of exercise was being conducted. It's part of our training for a certain kind of mission that is part of our
Operational training.
training.
But therefore, just one second, therefore this deep mistrust that Anit refers to, where does that come from?
Look, I have to read a small paragraph. Okay.
Rajiv, just give him the mic. I think the audience can't hear very well of that.
As there is no horizontal integration between the service headquarters and the Defense Ministry, and as early prejudices have got layered over by bureaucratic one-upmanship, a combative mentality has grown between the service headquarters and the ministry. Such an attitude has its own damaging consequences. The Defense Ministry, in effect, becomes the principal destroyer of the cutting edge of the military's morale. Ironic, considering that the very reverse of it is their responsibility. The sword arm of the state gets blunted by the state itself. So marked is resistance them to change here, and so deep the mutual suspicions, inertia, and antipathy that all efforts of reforming the system have always floundered against the rock of ossified thought. Written by Shri Jaswant Singh in his book Defending India, page 109, and the book was published in 1999. So, what we have been talking, it just goes to show here is somebody who has been in the armed forces earlier and now he's become a very senior politician he was when he puts it down. So that unfortunately has been the problem. As I said, it is not so much during the war, because by that time you have to fight with whatever you have. You can't say, okay, I won't fight. But it is during the peacetime which is more important as far as I am concerned. And that is where if we have greater harmony in the Ministry of Defense, less of suspicions, and there is objective dialogue.
Well, why are we not being able to identify the root of the suspicion? That's what I'm pushing the panel on.
Lack of integration. Lack of integration, and that is why the what has been now framed
The CDS.
in the CDS, that you have a military affairs department and you have the civilian DOD department. The way they have been structured, while I'm all for CDS and I'm glad they rise Rustai, but how it is going to function, and I hope the harmony, again, I'm hoping that there will be greater harmony and there will be greater synergy coming out of this. But this kind of a compartmentalization has to go.
Okay.
And that cannot go unless we have well-informed dialogue on all issues, well-informed amongst the politicians as well as bureaucrats as well as the military. So that is what is required in our future setup in the Ministry of Defense.
So let me get Rajiv and Sanjay and Narendra on this, because what General Malik is arguing suggests that the problem is structural. That the problem is structural. If you break down the silos, if you arrange the relationships differently, that harmony could come. What Anit and Manvendra are arguing, Rajiv, is somewhat different. They're saying that there is a huge gap, a kind of psychological gap almost, as it were, between the political class and the military class. There is no exposure or understanding by netas of matters military. And Manvendra is going so far as to say, if you want to be in government, do a compulsory military stuff. Or a national service. I don't know how you define it, but a national service, yeah.
No, so I think the book pretty much lays out for anybody who reads the book how this problem grew. It was not there before 1947, and then if you see how he lays it out very beautifully, that for the first decade and a half or 2 decades, this overwhelming paranoia that was in turn fed by people around politicians really caused a distance to develop between the political ruling class and the military. And so whether it was Timaya and Krishna Menon, who was Jairam's favorite, and I personally believe he single-handedly should bear the cross of most of the early damage that was done to the relationship.
Elaborate with one example.
Yeah, because of that, one of the problems with being a political leader who comes at problems with this arrogance that you know everything and therefore you don't even need to engage with or consult with anybody else, which is not a unique phenomenon amongst British politicians, but it was unique amongst with Krishna Menon at that time, was that he, you don't just look at General Timaya and say, look, I'm a socialist from London and I'll tell you how the military should be run.
Yeah.
And so that, in my opinion, was the beginning of the break of that, or the gap. Mm-hmm. And subsequent ministers or subsequent bureaucrats have done very little to bridge that gap, because it's in a lot of ways for bureaucrats and for people around the political leadership. And I say use the word bureaucrats as the fundamental first layer between the political leadership and the military. it suits them to have that gap. Because then their role as intermediaries and translators, if you want to call it that.
So the bureaucrat is more
becomes
powerful in a situation of a gap between a politician and a
So there is almost an inbuilt incentive to continue to maintain that gap. So having said that, I just want to go back to this whole Indian Express coup thing. You asked the wrong question. I mean, was there a coup?
that was
In
not
my
my
opinion,
question.
the coup, it was laughable. There was never a coup. But what that showed, because it was clearly something that was unleashed by some people in government, is that caused further fissures in the gap between the military and the political class, where you could fix a sitting general, or you could attempt to fix a sitting general by creating this little coup conspiracy. And everybody knew it at that time. I raised a shindig in parliament. Everybody knew that this was a hatchet job aimed at somebody. And so, if you end up as a political class doing that as your default go-to strategy, then you're not obviously incentivized to close the gap. So the absent dialogue, mutual incomprehension, and what I call paranoia is what has kept this gap going and continues to go. And I hope, like General Malik says and everybody on this panel says, with the CDS coming in, with having a uniform person sitting at the round table of policy making, that there would be some sort of a gap reduction between the various stakeholders that control policy and thinking of national security.
So let me take this to Sanjay, because this is my cue to push you on your argument that it is a lot of these relationships are driven by who is in which chair. Isn't that problematic? Because what happened, let's say, with General VK Singh and the Congress government was clearly a clash of personalities. Even if you trace it back to General Thimaya and Krishna Menon, it was clearly a collision of personalities. Shouldn't the military be insulated, the military of all institutions be insulated from this being so personality driven?
That's a difficult question. It doesn't happen in most countries. It doesn't happen in US, for example, where major generals and big chiefs have their job with metronomic regularity.
Yeah.
So I think personalities will be very important. Personalities have always been important, and Krishna Menon is a personality, not an institution. I totally agree with General Malik when he says it's an institutional problem. But personalities do play a role, and the best institution can be undermined by personality clashes, as we have seen in all these institutions. CDS is a huge institutional change, and Anit has argued nobody was happy with the old system. So when nobody is happy with the old system, something must be majorly wrong with the old system. It's expected. And now maybe a new system should be given its chance, and who knows, a couple of years from now, we'll be better.
Manvendra, do you believe that this sort of integration, structural integration, is actually going to change things? Because one of the arguments that Anit has made is that the CDS per se is a great reform, but we haven't seen enough information that it's been thought through till the last mile.
Yeah, the design that has been proposed, what's in the public domain, I think I have a problem with part of the design, because as General Malik quite rightly said,
Just take another mic, I'm not sure you can. Yeah. Sorry.
like General Malik said, I think we may end up creating another silo. The Department of Military Affairs may end up being another silo, and the whole game, and that's the purpose of the book and the discussion, is to have silos being removed and people working together. And I mean, the former DevSec was talking about personality. Maybe the personalities align now, and the silos may not happen. But the structure that has been proposed has created a silo, has created another silo. And that's why I'm hesitant to welcome it in totality. There is a problem, inbuilt problem, and
so you're reserving your optimism here. Anit, when we were last talking about your book, you used a very dramatic analogy, and you said, General Rawat had not yet been named officially as a CDS, so we were all expecting it, and you said, let it not be like demonetization, where everybody thinks, oh wow, this is a great disruptive historical idea, but its execution has not been mapped. Now, given what we've seen since then, what are your thoughts?
Firstly, I use that analogy to say that if we are going to create a CDS, let's try and have a larger public debate. And when they announced the DMA, I have looked at the Committee on Defense Expenditure. I've looked at people who have worked with the Committee on Defense Expenditure. I've seen all the previous reform committees. None of them had mentioned DMA. Right? So this is like a bombshell out of nowhere. I've not seen any serious paper that talks about the idea of a DMA in my entire scholarly life. And that's why I was like gobsmacked. I mean, where did this idea come from and how is it informed? I wish if you are creating such a new institution, and again, I go back to saying I'm a student of institutions and systems, I would like to know with one country which has a DMA structure. And that's why I'm a little cautious about this, because this might be like a game changer and this is good, but I would want to see the entire system play itself out. Having seen that, our initial apprehensions was this won't be an empowered CDS office. They have definitely empowered CDS office.
Yeah.
This might create new stresses and new tensions. And that's why I'm like, look, I would support the call of General Malik. We need to have an honest debate and a well-informed debate about strengths and weaknesses. And I don't think we're still in the
General Malik, we have some information in the public domain over the demarcation of powers between the CDS and the Ministry of Defence. Given what we know so far, how do you see it? We know that procurement and revenue and acquisitions are on one side and policy remains on the other.
Look, at the moment, I'm only expressing some apprehension, hoping that things will work out properly. I have three problems with the CDS, the way it has been announced. There are 54 small points that have been given as a responsibility to the new CDS. Okay. The first one is he's got a huge task and he hasn't got powers, adequate powers. For example,
You don't think he's empowered enough?
no, he's not.
Give an example, please.
For example, that he is equated with all the chiefs. He cannot dictate things, he has to consult them, which is fine. But he doesn't have the final say on that. Okay.
Right.
And he's now expected to have integrated headquarters, he's expected to have, all those things without any power. I have seen it, what happens in the Chiefs of Staff Committee. I mean, I was, for 2 years, I was chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee. But it was not always easy for us to work together, particularly where finance.
So you would have wanted a more pyramidal,
A little
hierarchical
more, yeah.
structure.
That's right.
And you would have preferred the CDS to be the kind of super boss of the three chiefs.
Well, yes, to that extent. I mean, look, it's not a battalion commander or a brigade commander job there.
Yeah.
At that level, you don't take any decision without consulting each other. Okay, so let's not just think because he has got powers and therefore I can drive my way through. That's not the way. It happens, you have to consult each other and then only take an informed decision. In any case, you have to discuss it further with the politicians and the bureaucrats and everybody else. The second thing is that I don't think people have realized the tough instinct within the three services as well as between the civil and the military in the Ministry of Defence. There is far too much of tough listing problem. And the third, which is more important, is the rules of business. Today also very clearly what they have said, it is the Defence Secretary who is responsible for all policies. And as you know, in the rules of business, he is the person responsible for the defence of the country.
Yes.
Now that is where I feel that it is not correct. What should happen? That the responsibility of policy, as Anit has also said, and I think Rajiv also said, should remain with the defence minister. He is the man, who has to have the final word on the policy. And both the CDS as well as the defence secretary should be facilitating our, for consultation, giving him advice so that for policy. You can't have the defence secretary becoming responsible for the policy and you have the CDS who has been given a huge task of almost restructuring the whole of military. That very sentence which has been put both in the covering letter as well as the detailed responsibilities given to the Department of Defence, somehow it doesn't gel with.
I want Sanjay Mitra to respond to that. Yeah.
As our Government is structured at this point of time. The responsibility in the rule of business don't go to a person, it goes to a department. So the department secretary is the person who implements that policy. It doesn't really say, there are only two creatures recognized. One is the minister, other is the secretary. Anything in the middle will have to be God knows what. So it has to be either a secretary or a minister. If the three chiefs cannot respond to another chief, another person in power, then they have to report to a minister or somebody better than a minister. I don't know, I need this. Second, the CDS has powers of transfer, promotion, award. The file of this thing, which earlier used to go through the defense secretary, will now go through the CDS. If that is not ultimate power in the armed forces, then I would like to be enlightened. And then all procurements, revenue procurement, have gone to the. And rightfully so. I'm actually pressing that capital acquisition should also go. CDS actually seriously empowered. I'm not clear what it means that he should be the top boss. How many stars is he? Hold on.
I think these are petty issues, that the 4 star, 5 stars, all these things are.
My point is that he, as the boss, he gets to transfer, promote, and give money.
But I think the larger question today is the responsibility of the defense policy. I'm coming to that. To say that that is the business rules that has been there, it doesn't mean that it cannot change. If you have found a major weakness in the structure for the last 73 years, and I have read out to you by some very senior people, so you have to think of changing those structures. You have to think of that if you can restructure the armed forces, why can't you restructure the Ministry of Defense also? And the responsibility. And I'm saying that the responsibility of the defense policy and should remain with the minister and not with the bureaucrat, the defense secretary, because you are undermining there, and
Who are you undermining?
the complete military structure. The complete military structure. To say that it cannot happen because it has not been happening, but this is what is laid down in our rules of business, business rules books and all, that I don't accept. I think time for us to change these matters. After all, what is required today? Let's be very clear. We want military effectiveness. Okay. And we want military effectiveness that can only come when, as I said earlier, that 3 people work in a harmony, and the person who is responsible, the defense minister, he is the last man as far as these policies are concerned. Incidentally, during war and all, even the defense minister doesn't take any decisions because all those decisions are taken in the CCS. The prime minister is there. But I don't go with this because the way it has been structured and the way this particular responsibility remains, then that tough interest and the suspicion and all,
Okay.
I don't think it will go.
Rajiv?
So I usually don't disagree with you, but on this one I will. I don't really think the CDS has to be the top boss. I think let's just step back a bit. I think what the CDS is doing has to be understood, that it is basically putting a uniformed person on the table, talking to the political class about everything. Policy making, acquisition, transfers, posting, all that. Of course, he doesn't have sole authority on all of that. He has a carved out set of authorities. And I suspect as the institution develops and as things get more comfortable and people get confident about the success of that institution, more and more power will get devolved to him, perhaps. So I'm not particularly concerned that the CDS is not the top man for defense policy, and I don't think it's going to be that way anyway. But what
Not for policy. I think he wanted him to be the top man above the 3 chiefs.
No, I don't. I'm not particularly concerned that he has to be the top general amongst the generals. I think these 3 chiefs are the chiefs of their forces, their respective armed services, and the CDS is somebody who will bring in the political authority as it exists today, and hopefully will continue to exist in the future, to create jointness, create strategic doctrines for jointness, etc., etc. So I don't think the CDS was ever meant, at least not in my mind, as I understood it, and I've been talking about CDS from 2008,
to be the top general amongst each other. That is not how I saw it.
Okay.
Number one, not I.
Sorry.
Yeah, so that's no. On the issue, I'll go back to this issue on the absent dialogue, and sorry to just move away from this. Is that if you look at that book and you look at, for example, turf wars, and frankly, it's learning for me that in '71, when there was a move to make Sam Manekshaw the CDS, it was Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal who said no way. And actually, I did not know this. I thought this was a much more recent phenomenon. So it has been historical. If you look at, for example, this issue of border roads, and I'm just giving you totally unconnected to your question, but I wanted to say this anyway. In 2010, a number of us in Parliament stood up and asked Jairam's government, why are you doing nothing about the border roads? And it turns out from this book that in 1955, they had the same problem. The roads were prioritized as strategic roads, but the system sort of had varying interpretations of what is high priority and what is low priority. So the gap is not just about trust and deficit and who's the big boss and who's the small boss and who calls the shot. It is also about an understanding of what are the priorities in national security. So that itself is a gap.
It's a very, sorry, gentlemen, if you want to comment, but it's a very interesting example of the Air Chief resisting Manekshaw's appointment to CDS. You want to say something? I have to actually open it up for a few questions.
No, sir, I just want to, I don't want to be misunderstood on something that I said earlier. Firstly, I mentioned about his being supervised in the military. That's what.
That's what. Yeah,
I
clarified that.
I have not said about the Ministry of Defence. Ministry of Defence, they will work. The bureaucrats have to work. All I am saying is that the policy
you would have had the three chiefs report to
the policy responsibility should remain with the minister with both.
So, but you would have preferred the three chiefs reporting to the CDS, being accountable to the CDS. Is that the correct phrase?
Well, in some way, yes, but I would say that it is not totally, it's not like the battalion commander.
Yes, of course.
I would have preferred that if we had the greater authority than what we are administrating in future, which is very important.
Some hierarchical differentiation, I think, is
that
what
would
we're
have
talking
been.
about. Quick last two comments from Manendra and then Anit. Yeah.
I actually want to add a fact to what Raji was talking about. It was begun by Jairam's hero, Krishnaman.
Jairam is really in the line of fire today. Yeah.
I don't. No, Krishnaman began Bollywood, so you should take credit for that. No, but my comment basically is that the whole thing is about domain expertise. That's the accusation against the civil servants. They don't have domain expertise, and they come into the defense ministry and the UPSC doesn't produce civil servants with domain expertise, but actually it does. And there are two services that the UPSC selects candidates for that pretty much live their service life doing defense stuff. One is defense accounts, and one is actually the foreign service. The foreign service person, wherever he or she is posted, is always dealing something to do with India's security and strategy, and of course economy and things also. So these two services already exist with a certain amount of domain knowledge, and the foreign service also brings the external aspects to it. And I think if the manpower policies can change in the defense industry, a lot of problems would change with the induction of these services.
Anit, just a quick last word. You do make the point that some of the resistance to change and reform has come from within the services, that it isn't always, it's easy to other the bureaucracy, other the politics, and also this turf war that General Malik alluded to. I think this is a very real thing. For this reason, I mean, now it's on theoretical, General Rawat is the CBS. For this reason, you had preferred one of the smaller services that you were to have got the CBS post. Why was that?
Because I think the apprehensions are there among the smaller sister services, but then get stranded. And there are real conversations or apprehensions about what would be the divisions of the breakdown of army actually. There are 45,000 army officers, much smaller Air Force cadre, much smaller Navy cadre. If you do it as it happens in the army with a proportional kind of representation of infantry now, that would cut down the number of slots that would be available to the Air Force and the Navy, and I think that would not be beneficial to the entire country. But to go back to the serious issue, I think So I interviewed people outside the country, and among the insights I got from the British system was the CDS and the permanent undersecretary both emphasizing to me and speaking the same language of we work as a team because there's a perfect partnership between the CDS, the permanent undersecretary, and the defense minister. And I think that becomes the crucial track. Because I think when I talk to kind of senior officers in the armed forces, I say, would you be happy if we get rid of all civilian bureaucrats and have the MOD staff just by the military? They're like, no. That would create. So we have to give a respect and an honor where it's due. The civilian bureaucracy has a very important role to play. I don't think enough people in the armed forces understand, appreciate, and for that I'd actually blame the civilian bureaucracy. Where is the history of the Ministry of Defense? In the last 70 years, tell me one book written by a bureaucrat which allows me to tell me the history of the Ministry of Defense.
Sanjay, there it is. Next book. Okay, I have about 5 minutes, I think, 5-6 minutes to take questions. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Manu.
Manu, just like, can someone get Manu a mic, maybe? Sanjay is a dangerous guy with a compliment for a journalist, by the way. Yeah.
The question is to you also, sir. So you said that capital procurement should be moved out to the CDS. That's a very bold statement, especially when we think that bureaucrats want to retain power. You're going the opposite way. But what do you see the role of the bureaucrat and the system in the MOD in the coming times? I mean, why should there be a bureaucrat there? And what roles would you see them holding on to? The question to General Malik and Rajiv is that haven't you figured out instances that the bureaucrat was the link between what the military thought and what the foreign ministry was talking, and there were instances in which it was very useful. So would you want to retain that in some form, even in the CDS system, when there is a different person? Just a question to both.
I think capital acquisition should go. The military capabilities are the most important core of the discussion. What the civilians should do is then left to the government of the day, and there are many other things that the civilians can do. And I think this is a great idea that Mandan Singh said that if there are people who are trained in defense issues like the foreign service, who knows?
What the question?
Isn't there a case to be made that bureaucrats are important?
No, of course. I think I said that. I think I was responding to them. I actually believe that there is a real role for bureaucrats. The overall administrative system. The issue is not about whether they should be there or not. I think it's about what capabilities they bring to the table and how they add value and how we can grow their capabilities, etc. And this is, in my I was just telling Ms. Mitra, which is this is the same issue whether you look at the Ministry of Technology, when you're discussing data protection law, or you're discussing anything within the government. Bureaucrats have to step up in this new world to being, listened to, understood, and counted by the quality of what they are saying, not because they got into through some admission many years ago. And I think that is the new world, and that is the expectation that we have of bureaucrats. So nobody is arguing, at least I am not, that somehow national security policy should be left to only men in uniform, men or women in uniform. I think they will have a view, and I am also very similar to arguing the fact that there is a need for the men and women in uniform to learn from the bureaucracy. And that mutual incomprehension and this gap that exists is basically allowing both these silos to sit around and pretend that they're geniuses. And effectively they're not. And I have seen this myself when I see the Army's perspective plan and I see the DRDO's perspective plan and how hopelessly out of sync they are with the reality of what technologies there are outside and vis-a-vis themselves. So these two have to exist, but they have to be much more competent and much more capable vis-a-vis the responsibility sought of them.
Thank you. The absent dialogue.
Can I
I'm so
ask
sorry. Sorry,
one
sir.
question from me?
I'm so sorry.
And I think that's an important. Firstly, of course, I agree with Chandrasekhar. Rajiv, he doesn't agree with me sometimes. But I do agree the bureaucrats have a major role to play. Let me tell you, the biggest role that they have, I think it's in all the armed forces in the world, are a financial role. And that is why I'm quite happy that the capital purchase sector remains with them. There are other aspects also. But what Manu said, that aren't you happy with a bureaucrat being in between? I'm not happy. That's not today. If you want real military effectiveness with the kind of strategic environment that we are all facing, then all three have to work together. With the two of them have to work together with the Ministry of Defence, with the Defence Ministry, sorry. And that is absolutely essential, because today there are two aspects. One is integrated military strategy, which is required right from the word go. You can't be waiting for Army plan, Navy plan, and Air Force, and then try and put the sum together. It has to start with that. The second important point here is the speed of taking decisions, which is much more important today than it was, say, even 5 years or 10 years or 20 years ago. Unless you are able to take all major decisions speedily, you will not be able to react, or you will not be able to carry out things. So for all that reason, I am suggesting no in between, somebody being, but all three of them working together along with the policy maker who happens to be the minister.
Thank you. Our Prime Minister, addressing the NCC rally, said 1 + 1 + 1 makes 111. And he was referring to the three services and the Chief of Defence Staff. I think this book has contributed a lot to removing some of the confusion that I see in the panel about the present CDS structure. I think the present CDS structure, to my mind, is good, is effective, and I think we should be grateful to the government to have put a military officer as a CDS, as a secretary to the government of India. The service headquarters, which were outside, which were appendages to the Ministry of Defence, are now integrated. And you have 200 people who have been sidestepped from the Defence Secretary to the DMA. And what more? Yes, it is unique to India, but it's a good system. This is without disturbing the mandate given to this task force, Ajit Doval task force was, without disturbing the existing structure, what is it that you can do? And I think those of us who have studied this, we've got a good system, and this 1 + 1 + 1 = 111 may come about, and the absent dialogue may start.
No, Ashok, there is nobody sitting here who's ungrateful to the government for creating this structure. I don't think anybody, even all of us, have said that it's a good step that has been taken.
You weren't very happy with it.
No, it is my job to point out certain deficiencies as I see them today. And I said, hopefully, all these will get corrected. That is what I said. But please don't say, I said, der aaye, durust aaye. And this whole topic of CDS has been under discussion, not from 20 years ago, but I think from 1960 onwards.
Yeah,
I have literally 5 minutes left, so let's yeah, please. Ajay, can't hear. Just speak loudly.
Director Peri, I'm a journalist with the Hindu newspaper. Sanjay Mitra, sir, after the CDS, what are the other remarks to follow with the MOD? Something like a domain-specific cadre or something of that sort. And will the CDS not be seen as undermining the bureaucracy? There's already some packet discussion going on this side.
I really can't reply. As to domain expertise, I have a completely off-the-cuff remark. Many CEOs of the world, guys who run airline companies, are actually finance fellows. The guys who run FMCG companies are social entrepreneurs. McKinsey produces large number of CEOs in the world over. So does HUL, Hindustan Unilever. So does Tata. I'm a little fascinated about the discussion of domain expertise. You can only go that far. I worked with the three services very closely. And I can say the level of specialization is so high, as Anit mentioned, it's impossible for an infantry officer to know too much about the nuclear submarine. Practically impossible. I mean, it's a different line. He'll have to sit down and study. He'll have to go to some college, sit down and study for a couple of years. Before he comes, he's off with whatever is happening. So I'm not very impressed with this domain. And that argument has gone on too far. What does the generalist civil service believe? I'm a little worried about Anit. He has very persuasive style. So he mentions that he wants to get rid of the generalist. I was a generalist and I'm very worried about that. And because what he says comes true, you know, that is what is the problem. He said CDS, and I only hope this part doesn't come true. The generalist civil servant brings a lot of value. He or she relates to the states. The army actually has a lot of things to do with the state government, with other ministries, whatever it be. I think I'll take up in General Mehta's thing. It's a step forward. There was something wrong with the old system. If there is, we were not very clear what was wrong, but there was something not going right. And the CDS will neither undermine nor strengthen. If the generalist is not required in the Ministry of Defense, he or she will not be there. What's the problem? Let it be a specialized thing.
Okay,
the Atomic Energy Department is a specialized thing.
Last two questions.
Yeah, I don't need a mic actually. I've got a question for the panel here. Amrita, you started with this on national service. Rajiv, you're involved with the NCC in some way, at least Wikipedia says so. Isn't the change got to be from the grassroots at the bottom level? Isn't that where change has to come about?
Let me take one more question and answer it together.
Sir, General, sir, I want to just to understand, we have won 4-5 war from Pakistan, but still we are unable to fix up to make them understand that they are loser, but still they are every day is happening. So where is missing that absent dialogue?
Okay. Anyone with a concrete question for the conversation? Yes, please. Can we just stand and ask?
I have no question. One clarification to
All the media questions.
No, I have one.
Yes.
You say the capital acquisitions should be given to the CDS or the DLA. How good or bad would it look for a uniformed person to be negotiating price deals with foreign countries and foreign entities? We would look like Pakistan. My question to General Malik. General Malik, when you say that the super boss, the CDS should be super boss of the three chiefs as described, do you think that this power has not been given keeping in line our fears that one single man will have a lot of power?
No, I don't agree because, look, most 70 countries, democratic countries in the world have a CDS with that kind of power. Okay, there is no question of having too much of power in that. I mean, I have interacted with the CDS you have in UK. The kind of system that we have in USA is quite different. I have interacted with CDS of France when he was appointed soon after that. So I don't think there is any apprehension, or there should be any apprehension that he is becoming too powerful. And at that level, again, I'm saying that, look, nothing gets decided without consulting each other. It is just that if I don't agree with you, this COS, whoever is the chief of army staff or naval staff, he still has the authority to come up and to say that, look, I do not agree with the CDS. I mean, that I'm not taking away that. But I'm just saying that if the restructuring has to be done, then he has to have greater power than what has been given today to be able to persuade, dictate sometimes. And if these chief of army, navy, and air force, they do not agree with him, they have all the authority to go over to the defense minister that, look, the CDS says this, but we do not agree. And incidentally, today also, the chiefs of staff have the power even to go to the prime minister. You know, I mean, the rules that were framed, it's not correct for a chief to be running straight to the prime minister, but there are some problems. And I know of one incident that I faced, and I had to go and tell the prime minister that I do not agree with my defense minister. The matter was sorted out.
What was the matter?
No.
Can't fault us for trying.
Ajay, one small thing. There's nothing untoward in a military officer negotiating an arms deal. They do it on revenue procurement all the time. When we bought the S400, the chief of the negotiating committee was an air marshal. So I think that's out. I mean, that doesn't apply.
Okay, I'm out of time actually. So oh, last one.
How will the generalist become a specialist both for the bureaucrat as well as
How does the general become a specialist?
No,
Yeah, Rajiv, I don't think the last one. Okay.
that's the main point, how the generalist will become the specialist, both in the bureaucracy as well as in the
Yeah, please answer that.
No, I think Anit, one of the things that Anit says in this book is this: unless we have a conscious effort of learning from what we have done, or what mistakes have been made, etc., or what even from a normal exercise. If there is no constant process of learning, there is no question of anybody becoming a specialist, even if you come into it with a PhD. I'm sorry? Yeah, no. So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. On the issue of NCC and draft, I think this is it's a philosophical issue. Should be more and more children exposed to the NCC. The Army headquarters says we don't have the capability and the infrastructure to cover all the schools that require it. Some schools don't want it. Some schools want it. I think this is normal discourse which it should continue. I personally am in favor because I was an NCC cadet. I believe it's done a lot of good to me. I keep encouraging kids to join the NCC, so I am a big believer in it. But should it be mandated? Should there be a mandatory draft? All national service? Those are issues I think we can keep discussing.
We have to close on that note. I would like to say I'm so sorry to those who have questions, but please maybe you can continue them informally with the panel. Do pick up the book if you're interested in this space. It is a very, very educated book. I learned a lot from reading it. Congratulations, Anit, and a big round of applause for our panel.
Thank you, Barka. I have one invitation and 6 quick notes of thanks, if you allow me, between you and cocktails outside. That's exactly the first invitation. Thanks to the invitation by Anit's parents, we have some cocktails and drinks outside. Wing Commander Anit Mukherjee from the Air Force and his wife Shyamali Mukherjee were inviting us. So the Air Force came to the rescue, to the Army. 6 votes of thanks. First of all, to our amazing speakers. I think you saw today, echoing what my colleague Shamika was saying before, that 10 years worth of research, archival digging, 150 people, hundreds probably. I think you're being too modest in 150. You spoke to hundreds of people worldwide about these issues. They pay off. They allow for discussion like this with a variety of people who have served the Indian state, who are still engaged in policy making, and hopefully will have impact and take these ideas forward. Anit, you've pushed us to think about. So thank you very much, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, General VP Malik, Mr. Sanjay Mitra, Colonel Manvendra Singh. Second note of thanks to Barka Dutt. Barka, it's amazing how you managed to ask the right questions, push hard, ask critical questions in the national interest, and be informed about so many issues, in particular about defense and security issues, which we know are close to your heart also. Third, to Rajaratnam School of International Studies, the NTU, which is hosting Anit as a professor. They're lucky to have you, but we hope to see more of you here in Anit. I think it's very important for people like you who are doing great research abroad about India to spend time here in India, push these issues, and help us make policy change. Fourth, to Oxford University Press, which has published this book and helped us communicate and support this event, and keeps publishing great research from scholars worldwide. Fifth, Anit, to you, really for bringing this discussion here, and to be a scholar and a colleague at Brookings India, and hopefully you'll take many of these issues forward in your future research at Brookings in Delhi and in other institutions. And finally, allow me to make a special thanks to the larger team at Brookings India, who's behind a lot of this work, allows us to do this work, sponsors us, helps us, supports us, and is often in the background doing a lot of work. Thank you, Shamika, for being here and explaining what research is about. Thank you to also our distinguished fellow who couldn't be here, but Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, who's been very supportive for our foreign policy and security team, which I lead. Our chairman, Vikram Singh Mehta, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. But most importantly, we're 34 now, Shamika, I think? 34 scholars at Brookings India. I would say the average age is somewhere in the late 20s. We're an extremely young organization,
And there's at least 5 different people who worked very hard in this event. You see them doing the administrative work, weeks of work, setting this whole up. But they have a tough job because doing administration, logistics, but they're also scholars in their own right. And they're coming up in a great way, doing great scholarship. Nitika Nair, thank you for organizing all this and pushing really hard on getting the best out of us. And let me suggest, as you do your own PhD one day over the next 10 years and get lost like Anit for 10 years, come back with a book called The Absolute Harmony and 10 years. Thank you. Please join us for drinks outside. Thank you.